Is preparing to take on one of the biggest challenges known to mankind, climbing Mount Everest.
New tonight, 6 News' Aaron Hartley tells us about his journey to 29,000 feet and his lifelong mission to give back.
Dr. Jacob Weasel lives in Rapid City, South Dakota, but Omaha is special to him.
Throughout all my education, stayed in Omaha. My family's still there, so very much still consider it to be home in many regards.
The Papillion La Vista grad completed his undergrad at Creighton on a full ride and stayed in Omaha to earn his medical degree from UNMC. He's now an emergency and trauma surgeon and a father to 3. But despite his busy schedule, he found a passion for mountaineering.
It was actually in undergrad, and one of my college professors who, we developed this friendship, he actually went out to Washington State and attempted to summit Mount Rainier that year. And, him telling me stories of that expedition, and ultimately they were unsuccessful, but it really just piqued my interest.
And after taking on numerous adventures, he's ready for Mount Everest.
And just the challenge of it and finding yourself in places that few others have been, that was always appealing to me.
As part of his training, he spends 2 hours on the Stairmaster, followed by an hour of lifting every day. And as he gets closer, he'll add more hours on. But the biggest obstacle will be mental.
So obviously the cold temperatures, the high altitude, these are things that you can anticipate. But the biggest challenges in mountaineering are never the physical challenges. The biggest challenges are always the mental.
Jacob is Lakota Sioux, meaning if he reaches the summit, he would become the first Native American to conquer Mount Everest. But he says the trek is much bigger than just him. His passion is to serve others. That's also why he started a nonprofit to fund women's health clinics in Nepal.
Stewardship is a big part of my worldview, and using the abilities and gifts that I've had intellectually to serve other people through surgery and through healthcare. And then physically being able to use what I do on a mountain to serve a greater cause. That's really the heart behind the expedition.
And he hopes his journey can encourage others to dream big.
I really just hope that this is able to inspire young Native kids to pursue whatever it is that they want in life and know that they're equally capable as anybody else.
On your side, Aaron Hartley, 6 News.
And Jacob will start his journey to Everest in April, and he'll be gone for about a month and a half. He tells us his hiking group has been working with SpaceX to develop a miniature antenna to take along with them. And if successful, this would be the first live stream from the summit of Everest.